Hi, it's Pastor Elizabeth. Welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Walls. I'm here with my friend, Pastor Felix. And we are going to be talking about a very interesting subject, one that many times can be very controversial, about evolution versus creation. And, you know, we're kind of dibbing and dabbing and going back and forth between science and biblical history or facts, right, as you might want to call it. And so I want to begin with kind of asking you, Pastor Felix, what do you think about this subject, or where is your state of mind with regards to evolution versus creation?
Yeah, so, in today's world, we have a lot of different points of view, right? But, when people start thinking and when I start thinking about, all right, where do we come from? Where did humanity come from? Where did this world, how did everything come about? You start thinking and start looking back at things that we have been taught, right? Down to elementary school, the first thing that you're being taught when you're in first grade is that this great big thing happened, an event happened many millions of years ago. And, out of that, humanity came, evolved from a trilobite that ended up walking on the beach, growing legs, ended up becoming ended up becoming monkeys, and the monkeys evolved, and all of a sudden, boom, here we are, right? So it made me think, okay, so what is creation versus evolution, right? The creation is the person who believes that the universe and the living organisms from specific acts, they're a act of divine creation, versus the evolutionists who think that, that believe in these theories, right? Theories of evolution and natural selection. Right. So, what kind of researching it more and more, these are the two positions that people believe in. Either one is based on, God made everything, and the other one is this just happened by accident.
Now, according to the Bible, Bible facts or Bible genealogy, let's put it that way. The human genealogy goes back about 6,000 years, according to the Bible.
Right.
Right? Now, it could very well be that the earth may have been created a long time before that,
right,
because you can also go into the different theories that are theologically based, which have to do with maybe the 7 stages as opposed to 7 actual physical days. Sometimes people count the Bible terms as one day can be 1,000 years,
right,
1,000 years could be one. So then they count it into that aspect. So there's a lot of talk about that as well, right? But according to what the genealogy, it goes back to the beginning of man, 6,000 years. And then you have the accounts of evolution that state that it's 4.54 billion years old. And it says plus or minus 50 million years. so that to me is a pretty huge disparity between the two. So what do you have to say about that?
When I hear those numbers, the millions and billions of years ago, all I hear is a long time ago in a land far, far away, this happened, right? Because what they've done is they just, decided to add millions of years, and all of a sudden their problem is solved. They were like, okay, so how did, monkeys go from being monkeys to being human beings? Just put in millions of years in between, and the problem is solved, right? And you have a lot of people that have these theories, right? This is one theory that I read up on. It's called the gap theory, where they take verse 1 of Genesis and say between verse 1 and verse 2, they squeeze in millions of years because they want to believe all these things that science is saying,
right,
and it just, people have tried throughout time to, try to squeeze things in there that shouldn't be there,
And then you go into those who are Darwinists.
Right.
Let's go into now, fast forward into the 1800s. His theory was basically that it began with, he felt that creation was 300 million years, right? Thereafter, and this was his first time in December 24, 1859. This is what he said, 300 million years. Thereafter, he reduced it to 150 million years. And thereafter, there were more edits, continuing to go diluting the years that the earth was created. So there are all these different theories and all of these different things that science, along with biblical theologians, come up with all of these different theories. Now, as far as when Jesus was kind of plucked into that genealogy, let's go back to what we were talking about, the 6,000 years of Bible history, right? It says that Jesus was kind of plucked in right between 5,600 years ago and 5,700 years ago, in between that genealogical timeline, right? And then you take that place, and this is out of the KJV version, but it talks about also that verse where God says in Genesis 6:3, where he says that now he's given the human lifespan of 120 years.
Yeah, so what's interesting about that, right? There are people that that believe that this referred to as the canopy theory, right? And this belief comes from writings of the Jewish historian named Josephus, right? Back in like the year 1000. He wrote that the Jewish belief was that there was a crystalline layer covering the entire globe that was about maybe 3 fingers wide, right? So given that situation, and say if there was this canopy there, but the earth was totally different, right? So now you have this earth that's enclosed, and now the air is different, the environment is different. It's kind of like being in those hyperbaric chambers, right? Where athletes go in, and they'll go in there, they'll get in there, and they'll spend an hour or two there, and they'll come back rejuvenated, right? So the belief is that that the earth was that way, and that's the reason why people used to live a lot longer. That's why animals grew way bigger, because it was a totally different environment. And even in today, farmers have tried that. They've tried to grow crops in these hyperbaric chambers, right, which is pure oxygen, and all of a sudden these tomatoes are growing, and they're like 50-pound tomatoes, you have all these big things that are growing, and so there's something to that, and a lot of people take that stance on saying, hey, this canopy theory, it's the reason why, and it explains why people live so many years. Think about being able to run 30 miles and not getting tired. Right. Those would be those type of conditions that, would exist, given, this theory here. And, and as far as the 6,000 years go, we know that from the time of Adam all the way to the time of Noah, if you do the numbers in the Bible, it adds up to about 1,600 years, right? So now when you go back, when population experts nowadays, when they backtrack the generations to go back to see where the beginning was, it goes back 4,400 years. So it lines up with the 6,000 years that the Bible teaches.
You add that to and then it comes up with more or less that 6,000 year figure. And also, going also back to that, the beginning of human civilization, or the accounts of human civilizations, biblically speaking, people lived up to 900 years. I mean, you take Methuselah, which was like the oldest documented person in the Bible.
Right.
And so that's why on this verse in Genesis 6:3, it says that now they would cut short to 120, because the humankind they were getting worse and worse and worse, more sin, more, a little bit of everything. So the years got shortened, right?
Absolutely.
More and more. But when you take all of these different things, right, and then you compare them to what Darwin thought, you compare them to the evolution accounts, it just seems like it makes more sense to me. Right. The accounts that go back with the Bible theories, as far as how many years the earth was created and all that. And then you go back to sometimes proving certain things, because one thing that I do want to say right now is, just because I'm a Christian, you're a Christian, many people are Christian, it doesn't mean that we don't believe in science. Science is everywhere. I'm not discounting science, so that's something that I want to make clear. It surrounds us in our everyday life in many different facets, many different areas, right? But it all goes down to who is the creator, or how did creation come about? Did it come through God, the creator? Did it come through the Big Bang Theory? Sometimes I joke around, God made the Big Bang Theory, said, let it be, and there was, and boom, everything just banged into place and came into place with his word, with his speech. And I just say that jokingly. But at the end of the day, who knows how it really came about? He could have made something scientifically happen with his word, and it all came together.
Absolutely.
So I'm not discounting a lot of these different things either. But one thing that I am saying in all this is that, you go back and now you start going into the science, and this is where science marries things that go on in Bible history, right?
Yes.
Where I was doing some research, and in all of these mountains, the Himalayas, the Swiss Alps, the Andes, Mount Everest, which is a summit of 29,000 feet above sea level, right?
Yep.
Do you know what was found?
Yes, I mean, so when the people went on exhibitions and they decided to climb the top of Mount Everest, which is like the highest point on this earth, right? What is it, 29,000 feet up there?
29,000, yeah.
And, but, they found something interesting, right? They found fossilized clams there, right? And they did not find fossilized dead clams. They found fossilized clams in the closed position,
Marine
which
life. means
that they were alive, So it's like, how did these things end up way up top at the highest point in this world if these are creatures that live in the sea? How do you explain that?
Right. It was a bunch of, so they found trilobites, brachiopods, they found trinoids, they found canodonts, all of these from the different family of starfish, eel creatures, and tiny crustaceans. So explain to me, in Mount Everest, how does this happen? Now you take where Mount Everest is, then you take where the Andes are, right? So now you're talking here, right? And then you have the Swiss Alps, you have the Himalayas, right? So now you have mountains that are on both hemispheres. You have the Western Hemisphere, you have the Eastern Hemisphere. So how do you explain that? How do you explain that in both of these? It only explains that there had to be some kind of worldwide flood,
Right.
to explain how on both hemispheres, in these highest points of mountains, there are fossils of marine life. So how can that possibly explain other than the fact that there was a worldwide flood, possibly the flood that God talked about with regards to Noah? What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, there's evidence all over the world about a great flood. And if you do some research on like cultures, there's over 300 cultures that have this myth, this legend about a great flood that happened. The people in Hawaii believe this guy named Nuhu and his wife and 3 kids survived in this great big canoe, the worldwide flood. There's stories in China all over the place about it as well. So everybody, throughout the entire world, they have these things, these traditions, these cultures that are passed down, these, through, speaking, right? Because, people left, records and stuff, but like, this is more like this verbal, they pass this stuff down, and a lot of these stories, they like pretty much line up with what the Bible teaches, right? And so you see a lot of those things happen, right? And then when you talk about people like that, like to refer to as, hey, fossils, and how do you date fossils, right? And talk about, all right, well, we date fossils using the geologic column, right? These layers of of dirt that they categorize, and they say, all right, well, we're gonna date this fossil because it was it was found in this layer. But then the question becomes, then how do you date the layer? Oh, well, we date the layer by the fossil. So it's like that circular reasoning, which is, okay, so which one was it, the chicken or the egg,
Right.
And I think that's one of the problems that they have with, trying to say, hey, the world, this just happened because, there's a lot more evidence that backs up the account of the Bible versus the account of, this explosion happening and, we're here by accident.
Even with regards to the topography that you're talking about, when you look at those kinds of things, they line up more with the theology of the Bible of what creation was all about.
Absolutely.
You take this sedentary rock, for example, right? They gave an explanation. They give explanations on how these formations take place. You go, for example, to Moab Desert here in mid-America, right?
Okay.
And when you go through there, or when you go through, let's say, the Grand Canyon,
Right.
these kind of places where this at some point was a landform that had water, right? So the way it takes place is that the water, it goes decreasing, and so it gives these ripples on the earth that begin to make all of these formations, right? So the explanation of how this sedentary rock was put into place makes more sense that it was done in an exponential manner
Absolutely.
as opposed to something that was done over the course of millions of years.
Right.
Now, when you're speaking about it, scientifically speaking, it makes more sense
Yep.
that it was something that happened very quickly. So from the time that the flood took over the earth to the time that they came out of the boat to the time that there was land once again was give or take a year.
Yep.
Give or take a year. Yeah. So there is more of a viable scientific explanation to that sedentary rock, to those formations in those deserts, right? To have kind of created these landforms, right? Through the years that are depicted here in Bible theology, as opposed to now what Darwin or what evolution kind of depicts as far as the millions of or billions of years.
You know what's interesting, right? That you bring up, and I'm glad you brought up this point, right, about the Grand Canyon. Because, growing up, in school, they teach you, hey, there's a river that runs through the canyon, and this river has been flowing for millions of years, and it's created this enormous canyon, right? But a lot of people don't realize that, where the river enters into the canyon, and it enters at a high point, meaning that when the river enters the canyon, it's high, but when it exits, the canyon is at a low point. So it's like, how could it be that a river runs uphill?
Exactly.
So it's like, so these are the things that we've been taught, since young. And a lot of these teachings go back to one thing, getting away from God.
Right.
And the enemy uses that, right? He uses that to say, you know what? I'm going to use these teachings. I'm going to use these things that God created and God made. I'm going to use them to my advantage, because guess what? The biggest lie that the enemy's ever, his most successful lie is to what? To have people believe that he does not exist.
Right.
Right. So then he's going to use all these things that God created, the dinosaurs, right? The flood, all these things. And he's going to use it to his advantage to say, look, no, wait a minute. This is millions of years ago. This happened by accident. This is, as opposed to saying, what, this was God's creation, right?
Right.
Look at if you read the book of Job, right? What is Job talking about in chapter 41? He's talking to God, and God is telling him what? Behold, behemoth, right? This is like my biggest creation, right? And he's talking about a brachiosaur, right? That's that dinosaur that was 60 feet tall, had a 20-foot neck, 60 tons. Like it was like this massive thing that God was proud of. He's like, look, behold, you know what I mean? This is what I've done. This is what I've been able to do. And if you look at history, for example, in Peru, in Ica, right? A couple hundred years ago, the Europeans went in there, they tried to take over, knowing what the Europe, they used to do back then. They came across these stones. They refer to them as the Ica stones. And in these stones, they had these drawings, and they found these drawings of dinosaurs, and dinosaurs were with people.
Exactly.
And you have all these legends throughout the world that talks about it. Look at old maps, and you see drawings of dinosaurs in there, right? And what's crazy that, people often ask, hey, well, how come dinosaurs are not in the Bible? I'm like, well, the word dinosaur was not a word until 1841.
Exactly.
So prior to then, they were referred to as dragons. Now, dragons, you could research that and look it up in the Bible, and dragons are in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that the enemy has used. And said, because there's a lot of new things, right? I mean, the word television didn't exist back in the 1800s. A lot of the new things that we have, and they just keep getting added onto the dictionary. So, dinosaurs and humans, yes, they lived together. The evidence shows that they lived together. It wasn't billions of years ago.
It could have been, during the last periods of those stages. But at the end of the day, these are things that prove, along with the depictions in the different caves, the different people, there is evidence out there, but it's always trying to be discounted. And because if this evidence is discounted, that means they are discounting God, the Creator. At the end of the day, it's very important for everybody to be able to do their own research. There are going to be many things that we're going to have to read in between the lines with. There are going to be some things that we're not going to be able to say exactly it was this or it was that. But at the end of the day, once you come to know God, and once you come to know what He is about, and once you start tying some of these scientific facts along with biblical notes, you'll be able to more often be able to truly prove that creation is of God.
Yes,
God the Father.
Yeah, and then just to close, I was going to go back to Charles Darwin, right? And And, and how many of our stories are similar to his, right? I mean, Charles was a person that was raised up, a believer. He went to school for this. He was going to be a person that God was going to use. And then his life ends up getting derailed when he takes this tour around the world and he starts studying, teachings from other people who were casting doubt about God and creation and how old the earth is and all these layers and stuff. And it created a lot of doubt in him. And ultimately it led to him, coming up with this theory that says, hey, you know what? Everything has a common ancestor and everything came from this, and basically rebelling against God, And to me, that's like the ultimate sad story, because you know what? God could have used him for great things.
Yeah.
But instead he got, went another way. And now to this day, his teachings are still being taught in our schools. They're being taught to our young ones, and our young ones don't know any better. Tell a 5-year-old, hey, there's a dinosaur outside. The 5-year-old is going to believe you.
Yeah.
Whereas and that's one of the tools that the enemy has been using to get our people, get our kids early. So that way, they go away from the belief of, what, there's a creator, there's a maker. And I personally believe, because, if there ain't no creator, then who do we answer to?
Exactly.
And how do we tell what's right and wrong?
So it's very important that us as parents, we come together and truly bring this education, not just through the Bible, but also let's do our fact check thing. Let's do our, let's even dive into science, because science is a real thing. Let's tie the two worlds together and let's see how science works together, because God created science, and he created it for and that's how we all function. So at the end of the day, it's not one or the other. It's just understanding that the creator of it all is God the Father, and that's where all life comes from, and that's where all life will end up if we truly also believe unto him. So I encourage you all to be a part of that. Do your own research, educate your children, so that as they get older, especially in college, they don't stray away from the path of God. Thank you for being with us. I hope you enjoyed this topic. Pastor Felix, thanks for coming out.
My pleasure.
Until
I love
next
this.
time.
We'll do it again.
We'll see you. God bless.